On this episode of AV Week, we talk about NAB, the National Association of Broadcasters. Annual show was this week in Vegas. Also, what other shows the AV community should be going to, and sustainability and AV. All that and more. Next on AV Week.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is AV Week, episode 558, recorded Friday, April 29th, 2022. Tech Savvy.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by
Sennheiser.
This is AV Week, our weekly wrap-up of audio, visual news, and information. My name is Tim Albright. I am your host. I think I'm going to call this episode California Women, because that's who I have on this show. First and foremost, Corey Schaefer. She's from QSC. Welcome, ma'am.
Hey, good to be here.
Good to see you. Also with us is Tammy Fuqua. Tammy is from ATEM. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And I've hung out with Tammy more in Vegas than I have any other place this year. We'll talk about that in a second. A couple of housekeeping things. My buddy Bradford Ben will be hosting for me next Friday because I will be on my way to Barcelona and ISE. That is not to rub it in anybody's face that's not going, but that is where we're headed.
And I will see you there.
I will see you there.
I'm jealous.
A bunch of folks will see there, and we'll be doing some stuff from the show floor as well. So check that out. Also, Infocom comes shortly on the heels of that. If you are an AV user, go by the website avnation.tv and sign up for the host of parties that we're doing. One is our AVNation Fuse party, which is all about the AV user. That is on Tuesday, I believe from 6 to 8 at the Ice Bar in Las Vegas. And then, of course, the AVNation Tweet Up from 4 to 6 in the West Hall. Speaking of the West Hall, speaking of the LVC, speaking of Las Vegas, NAB was this week, National Association of Broadcasters from Las Vegas. That is where I saw and got to hang out with Tammy. Corey, we'll start with you on this. Your husband was out there with his company. A number of folks was out there. I will also say QSC was out in Vegas for a different show, CinemaCon, and I do want to kind of touch on that at the end here. But Corey, from the first part here in NAB, what can the industry learn? The AV side, what can they learn from the folks at NAB?
I feel like what our industry can learn from the broadcast industry as a whole is how I'm looking at it is I think we've really learned over the last couple of years that what we're doing in Pro AV is broadcast, and it's happening in every element of our industry, right? Whether you're a house of worship, whether you're a large enterprise customer, whether you're education, the technologies and the what is done in broadcast is exactly what we now need to do in Pro AV. And even moving forward, out of the pandemic, we're still going to have events that we want to quote broadcast. So I think that what we can learn is that we are in the broadcast industry in Pro AV, is how I look at it. So all the technologies launched at NAB, I mean, we're really seeing encroach into everything that we do every day in Pro AV.
All right. Tammy, same kind of question here is you were on the show floor, as I mentioned. A number of AV companies were there, folks that we will all see back in Vegas for Infocom, but there were some ones that weren't necessarily, and I'm not trying to sell for the Infocom show, but there were some that I could see, you might want to stick in that, stay right there, right, until June. What do you think that we can learn from the show?
Yeah, well, much like Corey says, I'll echo a lot of that. The two worlds are kind of colliding. So we're seeing that crossover. But yeah, I think that we could all learn a bit from, the broadcasting world. A10 isn't always known for our broadcasting products, but now that those worlds are starting to come together, especially like in the house of worship and education, we do have these kind of smaller components that will help those organizations be able to come into that streaming and broadcasting world that maybe they wouldn't have had the chance to do before. So like we have a couple of products that would actually fit for that, amateur broadcaster or amateur broadcaster, to be able to do that. I've seen that in my own little church where we never did any broadcasting. Now we rely on our streaming. So and that's a place I would have never thought of coming into, but now with the pandemic, we were forced into it. So, and now we're learning more about how we could do these types of broadcasts.
And we've been watching in broadcast, whether it's an election night or whatever, the real use of these technologies, right? The touch screens, the drawing on things, the flipping, the blah blah. That has got to be brought into our day to day in corporate enterprise, higher ed, etc. Because we really are streaming to those that aren't there in person, and it's really important that we can deliver this kind of fun experience for those on the far end as well as those in person.
Yeah, because with technology, the way that society is now, I almost feel like if it's not technically savvy, I'm like, oh well, let me go over here and check out this person's technology. Only because I tend to be a technology person, but even my friends, we're all kind of tech savvy now, so you have to bring that into every aspect of life now.
So one of the things that I was watching, and Corey, goes back to what you were saying about we're all broadcasters now. We're all doing that. There's a phrase, and I know this is not a new phrase in the broadcast industry, so don't write me letters if you're a broadcast engineer. But it's a phrase called REMI. REMI, and I'm going to butcher this, so give me a second. It stands for remote switching, or remote management of a show. So this is where one person sits with a TV switcher, a video switcher, and they have content from all these disparate sources, including local playback, local live, as well as through the internet playback and live. And the ability then to pull all these disparate sources together, different resolutions, different speeds, bring them all into one piece of equipment, and then send it back out either locally or again over the internet. Looking at stuff like that either gives me hope for AV over IP, or scares the bejesus out of me for AV over IP, because here's a system and here's a group of people who know video like the back of their hand, right? Probably better than a lot of AV folks do, and they're doing something that's far and above, way beyond what any of us would have even thought possible 10 years ago. So where do we go? How do we leverage some of these technologies? I mean, some people do SDI, right? But some people don't. They're leaning more on NDI. And then you look at this, which incorporates a lot of different things all into one piece of equipment. Is there something here for AV, whether that's leveraging the AWS Elastic Cloud, which some of these folks were doing, or it's leveraging a different type of AV video compression that we're not privy to yet?
Right. Or, really about being open to all kinds of formats, right? And
Yeah.
being able to, and that's where things are going, in my opinion. It's like all about being the openness and how to bring in those and still get a really good product that you push out in the room, or to the far side, or whatever. But it's interesting, isn't it?
Well, I'll tell you that AWS booth was really hopping at NAB. I mean, every time I walked by it, there was so many people in it. So I totally get it. Yeah, and on all those matrix switchers and things like that, you could come talk to me at A10. So shameless plug.
Really quickly before we turn the page, there's two more things about what happened in Vegas.
Yeah.
And yes, typically it stays in Vegas, but I'm not going to do that this time. Except what Joe Way and I did. I have no comment on that other than that.
Now I'm intrigued.
The show, you were with us one of the nights. So the show itself released their numbers, 55,000. Now, for those of us in AV that have been used to going to Infocom, 55,000 seems like a lot, right? That is more than I believe any Infocom has hit historically. For context, though, National Association of Broadcasters, NAB, has typically been around 100,000. So while not a huge failure, right? Not from a number standpoint, but certainly not to where it was pre-pandemic. Corey, you've been going to these shows for a number of years. Same with you, with Tammy. We'll start with you, Corey. What does that say? What does that say about the trade shows in general? What does that say as we're trying to ramp up for both ISE in a week from now and InfoComm basically 5 weeks from now?
Yeah, I think from a manufacturer's point of view, we have found other ways to reach the client, right? So even if you're doing new product announcements or, you've got some really hot news, we have a variety of ways to reach the client now because we had to adapt. And I think that's really, really good. And so that just means because we've had other ways, we've adapted in reaching customers in other ways, we don't have to do trade shows like we've always done them. And also, not everybody has released their whole team for open travel again either. I mean, I've noticed as I plan for ISE on who's going to be there, etc., many companies have not gotten the green light go on travel. There are companies being very conservative, before they have their employees hit travel again. So I think it's just kind of a mixture of things. And I think that also, company or people that might go to NAB also have other options coming up because shortly after NAB is the ISE show. And then we've also got, of course, InfoComm coming June 8th, but the week before InfoComm is the NAB show too. I mean, so What happened is a lot of the trade shows got condensed together and organizations are kind of saying, pick which one you'd like to attend, but you're not going to do all of them like companies may be allowed previously. So I think, the trade shows condensing with us finding ways to reach customers in other ways, with companies haven't released their, travel restrictions. I think we're all seeing that, but I think 55,000 is really encouraging.
All right, Tammy, you and I hung out in CES. It was not 55,000.
Nowhere near it. Yeah.
So compare and contrast those two shows that you and I have already done this year.
Well, for me, I find it interesting that in a very short period of time, we're seeing that gain in people attending shows. I mean, just in January, CES was very, very slow. Then we come up here to NAB, and while 55,000, I feel like that's good. And I am ready to go out and, talk to people and be around large crowds. Not everybody is. So I think it'll just be a slow ramp up, right? I don't think we should be discouraged by 55,000. It was a great start. And like Corey mentioned, when I'm asking people about InfoComm, I'm still hearing, I'm not totally sure if I'm going because my company hasn't approved it yet. So I think we're kind of in this middle ground of kind of trying to get back into in-person events, but yet there's still that hesitation to send like full booth staffs like we used to, and still a hesitation of attendees wanting to get out and be around large groups. So yeah, we're kind of like in this weird pause where it's like, I'm not sure if I'm going or not.
Thanks so much for watching this first segment of AV Week. To check out the rest of the episode for free, click on the link below or go by the website, avnation.tv. That's avnation.tv.